Deep within a secluded forest, shrouded in an eerie silence, lay a forgotten campground. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where the whispers of the past lingered in the air, and the shadows of the trees seemed to hold secrets long forgotten. Towering trees cast long, menacing shadows, their branches swaying ominously in the wind. The forest was alive with an unsettling energy, as if it were a living, breathing entity, watching and waiting. The air grew heavy with a palpable sense of dread, as if an unseen presence watched from the depths of the woods. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed to echo with a sinister intent. A group of friends, eager for a weekend escape, arrived at the desolate campground, their laughter and excitement a stark contrast to the unsettling atmosphere. They were oblivious to the history of the place, to the stories of those who had vanished without a trace. They set up their tents, the canvas rustling in the breeze, their voices echoing through the stillness. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees standing like silent sentinels watching their every move. As darkness descended, a campfire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows that danced upon the surrounding trees. The warmth of the fire was a small comfort against the encroaching night, but it did little to dispel the growing sense of unease. Strange noises began to filter through the forest, whispers carried on the wind. It was as if the forest itself was trying to communicate, to warn them of the dangers that lurked within. The friends exchanged uneasy glances, their laughter fading into nervous silence. The once jovial atmosphere was now thick with tension, each of them feeling the weight of the forest's gaze. One by one, they retreated to their tents, hoping to find solace from the growing sense of unease. The thin walls of their tents offered little protection from the unknown, and sleep came fitfully, if at all. As the night wore on, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as if the forest was alive with voices, each one telling a story of fear and despair. A cold wind swept through the campground, extinguishing the campfire and plunging the group into darkness. The sudden loss of light was jarring, leaving them vulnerable to the unseen forces that surrounded them. Fear gripped their hearts as they realized they were not alone in the wilderness. The forest, once a place of adventure and excitement, had become a realm of terror, and they were its unwitting prisoners. High in the remote mountains, nestled among towering pines, stood a dilapidated cabin. Its wooden walls were weathered and worn, the windows boarded shut, as if hiding a dark and sinister past. Legends whispered of a solitary hermit who had once inhabited the cabin, driven mad by an unspeakable evil that lurked within its walls. A young couple seeking adventure and solitude stumbled upon the abandoned cabin. Intrigued by its mysterious aura, they decided to spend the night, unaware of the horrors that awaited them. As they stepped inside, a musty odour filled their nostrils, the air thick with the weight of forgotten secrets. The cabin was sparsely furnished, cobwebs clinging to every corner. A large, ornate mirror hung above the fireplace, its surface clouded with age. As the couple explored their surroundings, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. One of them glanced at the mirror and gasped in horror. Staring back at them was not their own reflection, but the contorted face of a malevolent entity. Its eyes glowed with an eerie red light, and a sinister grin spread across its pale, lifeless face. In the heart of a sleepy town, shrouded in an oppressive silence, lay an ancient graveyard. This graveyard, older than the town itself, held secrets that had been buried for centuries, secrets that the townsfolk dared not speak of. Worn headstones, etched with the names of the departed, stood like silent sentinels, their shadows stretching long and thin in the fading light. Each name told a story, a life lived and lost, and the weight of these stories seemed to hang heavy in the air. Locals whispered tales of restless spirits that roamed the graveyard at night, their mournful cries echoing through the darkness. These spirits, it was said, were the souls of those who had met untimely and often violent ends, unable to find peace even in death. A group of teenagers, their youthful curiosity outweighing their better judgment, decided to test the legends. They had heard the stories all their lives, passed down from generation to generation, and now they wanted to see for themselves if there was any truth to the tales. Armed with flashlights and a sense of invincibility, they entered the graveyard as darkness descended, their laughter echoing through the stillness. They joked and teased each other, trying to mask their growing unease with bravado. They wandered among the headstones, their flashlights illuminating the weathered inscriptions. Each name they read aloud seemed to pull them deeper into the graveyard, as if the spirits themselves were guiding their steps. As they approached the oldest part of the graveyard, the air grew heavy with a palpable sense of dread. The laughter faded, replaced by a tense silence as they realized they were not alone. The temperature dropped, and a cold wind swept through the trees, rustling the leaves and sending shivers down their spines. It was as if the very air around them was warning them to turn back. But they pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and fascination. One of the teenagers, emboldened by a dare, began to call out the names etched upon the headstones. Each name echoed through the graveyard, breaking the silence and stirring something deep within the earth. Suddenly the ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, a mix of anguish and rage that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The teenagers turned to flee, their hearts pounding in their chests, but the path behind them had vanished. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped, the graveyard now a labyrinth of shadows and fear. They were trapped within the graveyard, at the mercy of whatever malevolent forces they had awakened. The legends were true, and now they were living the nightmare with no way out and no one to hear their cries for help. Panic surged through me as I realized something was amiss. The air felt thick with an unexplainable tension, and my heart raced as if it knew something I didn't. I tried to rationalize the feeling, but the creeping dread was undeniable. The drive back from the graveyard was a blur of fear and adrenaline. The fog seemed to swallow the road, and every shadow felt like it was reaching out to me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with tension. I could feel a presence in the car, a coldness that seeped into my bones. It was as if the temperature had dropped several degrees and my breath came out in visible puffs. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. Glancing in the rearview mirror, I saw nothing but the empty back seat, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. My eyes darted back and forth, expecting to see something, anything, but there was only darkness. Back in my apartment, I tried to shake off the unease. The familiar surroundings usually brought comfort, but tonight the silence was deafening. I locked the door behind me, hoping to shut out whatever was following me. The familiar surroundings usually brought comfort, but tonight the silence was deafening. Every shadow seemed to move, and the darkness felt alive. I turned on every light, but it did little to dispel the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of curtains sent shivers down my spine. I jumped at the slightest sound, my nerves frayed and on edge. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. Sleep was impossible, my mind replaying the events at the graveyard. The blood-curdling scream echoing in my ears. I tossed and turned, unable to find any peace. The full moon outside cast eerie shadows on the walls, adding to my unease. Days turned into a sleepless nightmare. The dark circles under my eyes grew more pronounced, and I felt like a ghost of my former self. Time seemed to blur, each day blending into the next without respite. The feeling of being watched never left. It was a constant, oppressive presence that weighed on me. I found myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there, but there was never anyone. Shadows seemed to move in the periphery of my vision. Whispers brushed against my ears when I was alone. I couldn't tell if it was my mind playing tricks on me, or if something truly sinister was at play. The whispers were faint, almost indistinguishable, but they sent chills down my spine. My apartment, once a sanctuary, had become a prison of fear. The walls that once provided comfort now felt like they were closing in, trapping me with whatever malevolent force had followed me home. I felt isolated, cut off from the world outside. One night I woke to a cold hand on my shoulder. The touch was icy, sending a jolt of fear through my body. I froze, too terrified to move, my mind racing with possibilities of what could be behind me. My blood ran cold as I turned to face the intruder, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was dark and my eyes struggled to adjust. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and frantic, but the room was empty. There was no one there, no sign of an intruder. I was alone, yet the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. It was as if the presence was mocking me, playing with my fear. The only sound was my ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. I sat there, paralyzed with fear, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The silence was oppressive, and I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. I was alone, yet the presence felt stronger than ever. It was as if it was feeding off my fear, growing more powerful with each passing moment. I knew I had to find a way to rid myself of this malevolent force, but I had no idea where to start.